The forgotten garage. The air in the old garage was thick with the scent of aged wood, rusted metal, and forgotten memories. Sunlight filtered through the broken panes of the dusty window, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete floor. Beverly and Mason stood at the entrance, their eyes scanning the space that once belonged to their late grandfather, Robert Whitmore. They had never truly explored this place before. As children, their grandfather had always warned them away, saying it was his sacred space. Now, years later, after his passing, the siblings had inherited his home, along with everything inside it, including this garage, which they were about to clear out. "Do you remember ever coming in here?" Mason asked, brushing a cobweb off his arm. Beverly shook her head. "No, Grandpa always kept it locked." She hesitated. "It feels strange being here." Mason gave her a reassuring nudge. "Come on, it's just an old garage. Nothing to be scared of." Still, there was an unsettling energy in the air. The space seemed frozen in time, untouched since their grandfather's last days. Tools hung on the walls, rusted but neatly arranged, as if waiting for their owner to return. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, filled with old books, boxes, and jars of unidentifiable substances. As they stepped further inside, Beverly ran her fingers along a workbench covered in old blueprints and faded newspaper clippings. One headline caught her eye. "Man vanishes without a trace. Authorities baffled." "Look at this," she called out, holding up the newspaper. Mason took it and squinted at the date. "This is from 1965, way before we were born. Why would Grandpa keep this?" Beverly shrugged, but the question gnawed at her. They continued sifting through the clutter, pushing aside piles of old wood and metal scraps. Then, in the far corner, hidden beneath a tattered tarp, they spotted it, a large, weathered blue metal box. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The box was different from everything else in the garage. It looked deliberately placed, as if someone had tried to keep it out of sight. Mason stepped forward first. He knelt down, wiping away layers of dust with his sleeve. The box was locked, its latch rusted but intact. "What do you think is inside?" Beverly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason exhaled. Only one way to find out. He tugged at the latch, but it wouldn't budge. He glanced around, then grabbed a screwdriver from the nearby workbench and pried it under the lock. With a sharp snap, the latch broke free. Beverly felt her heart pound as Mason slowly lifted the lid. Inside, they expected to find tools, old papers, maybe some antique trinkets. Instead, what they found made their breath hitch. Bundles of old letters, photographs, a leather-bound journal, and at the very bottom, a small, locked wooden box. The siblings exchanged a glance. Why would Grandpa keep this hidden? Beverly murmured, carefully picking up a faded photograph. It was a black and white picture of a young man, no older than 20, standing beside a car. He had sharp eyes and a strong jawline, but something about his expression was hauntingly familiar. Mason held up one of the letters. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the ink slightly smudged. He carefully unfolded it and began to read aloud. "My dearest Robert, I fear we are running out of time. If you find this, know that I did everything I could to protect him. But they are still watching. We cannot let them win. With love, E." A heavy silence filled the garage. "What does this mean?" Beverly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we just uncovered something Grandpa never wanted anyone to find." Beverly's hands trembled as she picked up the small wooden box. It was locked, just like the metal one had been. Something told her that whatever was inside could change everything they thought they knew about their grandfather. And some secrets should never be forgotten. The secrets beneath the dust. The weight of the small wooden box in Beverly's hands felt heavier than it should have. The lock, though rusted, was still intact, and the mere sight of it sent an eerie chill through her veins. She exchanged a glance with Mason, whose brows were furrowed in concentration as he examined the letter again. The name at the bottom meant nothing to them, yet the urgency in the words felt deeply personal, as though the letter had been written in desperation. Beverly turned the wooden box over in her hands, running her fingers over the intricate carvings on the surface. The craftsmanship was beautiful, but the more she studied it, the more she realized the carvings weren't just decorative. They were symbols, deliberate, precise, and meaningful. "This isn't just any box," she whispered. Mason looked up from the letter. "What do you mean?" Beverly traced a circular pattern on the lid. "These symbols. They look familiar. I've seen them in Grandpa's old books before." Mason leaned in, his fingers brushing the edge of the box. "You think this is some kind of puzzle?" Beverly exhaled. "I don't know. But I have a feeling that whatever is inside here, Grandpa never wanted anyone to find." Mason grabbed the screwdriver again and attempted to pry the lock open, but the wood was sturdy, refusing to give in. "We need a key," he muttered. Beverly's gaze darted back to the metal box, still filled with letters, photographs, and the old leather-bound journal. If there was a key, it had to be somewhere among these items. She picked up the journal, feeling the brittle leather crack slightly under her fingertips. Flipping it open, she saw the first page was marked with their grandfather's handwriting, elegant yet hurried, as if he had written it in secret. "To whoever finds this, know that I did what I had to do. There are truths buried in time, and not all of them should be unearthed. But if you are reading this, then perhaps it is fate. Just remember, once you open the door to the past, there is no closing it again." Beverly's breath caught in her throat. Mason, who had been leaning over her shoulder, whispered, "He knew someone would find this eventually." Beverly turned the page. The entries were dated, some scribbled hastily, others carefully written. The more she read, the clearer it became that their grandfather had been hiding something big. One entry in particular stood out. June 3, 1972. "They are still watching. I cannot let them find me, not after what I know. The key must remain hidden. If they take it, the truth dies with me." Beverly's grip on the journal tightened. The key must remain hidden. Mason sat back, exhaling sharply. "You think it's still here? After all these years?" Beverly's mind raced. If their grandfather had gone through such efforts to hide the box, he wouldn't have kept the key in plain sight. It had to be somewhere safe, somewhere only he would think to look. Her eyes scanned the garage, taking in every nook and cranny. Tools, shelves, drawers, workbench. Her gaze stopped at the old wooden clock hanging on the wall. It was an antique, one of their grandfather's prized possessions. Without hesitation, Beverly stood up and rushed to the clock. Mason followed, confusion written all over his face. "What are you doing?" Beverly reached up, carefully removing the back panel. Her fingers brushed against something small and metallic. A key. She pulled it out and turned to Mason, her heart racing. Mason's eyes widened. "No way." Beverly held her breath as she walked back to the wooden box and inserted the key into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the lid lifted. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a single folded document and a small photograph. Mason picked up the photograph first, his face going pale. "Bev, look at this." Beverly leaned in, and the moment her eyes landed on the image, she felt the ground shift beneath her. It was a photo of their grandfather, but not as they knew him. He was young, maybe in his 20s, standing next to the same man from the other photograph they had found earlier. But there was something else. Behind them was a large government building, and at the bottom of the photo, written in faded ink, was a single word: Project Ichijo. Beverly swallowed hard. "What is this?" Mason unfolded the document, his eyes scanning the text. When he reached the bottom, his hands trembled. Beverly grabbed the paper and read the words that would change everything. Classified DOSFAR, United States Government. Pro GCTECHO. Official record. SUDBGCT. Robert Whitmore. ALIAS. Edward Hayadowthaoran. Her heart stopped. Alias? Mason whispered. Beverly shook her head, her voice barely audible. Our grandfather wasn't who we thought he was. Shadows of the past. The weight of the document in Beverly's hands felt almost unbearable, as if the words on the page could rewrite everything she had ever known about her grandfather, about her own family. Robert Whitmore, alias Edward Hawthorne. The name sent a strange chill down her spine. Mason sat down heavily on the workbench, rubbing his temple as if trying to process what they had just uncovered. The garage, once a simple relic of their childhood, now felt like a hidden vault of secrets that had been buried for decades. We need to take a step back, Mason said finally, his voice shaky. Grandpa had an alias. That means, what? He was in hiding. He was running from someone. Beverly's fingers tightened around the document. Not just someone. The government. Mason scoffed. That doesn't make any sense. Grandpa was a mechanic, a quiet man who fixed cars and told us bedtime stories. How could he be involved in something so big? Beverly didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing. They couldn't ignore this. She turned back to the document and started scanning the text again, her breath catching at one particular section. Project ECHO. Common D Intel Intelligency File. SUDGCT. Robert Whitmore. ALIAS. Edward Hayadowthaoran. STATUS. Terminate. Missing since 1975. Reason for termination. Compromised operation. Information H. Beverly swallowed hard. Terminated. Mason, according to this, Grandpa was officially declared missing in 1975. That's years before we were even born. Mason took the paper from her, his eyes scanning over the words. His throat bobbed as he tried to make sense of it. That's impossible. He was here. He raised Mom. And he raised us after she passed. Beverly's mind raced. Had their grandfather been living under a false identity all these years? Had he faked his disappearance? The answers were buried in the pages of the journal. Beverly flipped through the old leather-bound book, searching for a clue. The entries were frantic, almost paranoid. The handwriting became more erratic the deeper she read. July 8, 1975. They know. I don't have much time. I have to disappear. Eleanor, if you find this, if they find you, I'm sorry. Protect him. Protect the truth. She glanced up at Mason, her heart hammering. Mason, who's Eleanor? Mason shook his head, looking just as lost as she felt. No idea. The name didn't match anyone they knew. Their grandmother had passed away when their mother was young, and she had never mentioned an Eleanor. Then, Beverly's fingers traced over the last words of the entry. Protect him. She looked at Mason, her voice barely above a whisper. Who was he trying to protect? Mason turned back to the contents of the metal box, rifling through the letters again. Most were addressed to Robert, or Edward, but one stood out. It was sealed in a thick, yellowed envelope, addressed simply to my son. A heavy silence fell between them. Beverly's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. Inside was another letter, written in the same frantic handwriting. If you are reading this, then you found what I have tried to keep hidden. I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to bear the burden of my past. But there are things you must know, things that have been kept from you. They took him from me, and I could not stop them. They will come looking again. Be careful. Trust no one. Find Eleanor. She has the answers you need. Mason clenched his fists. What does that mean? Who did they take? Beverly's mind spun. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but one thing was clear. Their grandfather had been hiding something far bigger than they had ever imagined, and someone named Eleanor held the missing answers. Mason exhaled sharply. We need to find her. Beverly nodded. And fast. If Grandpa was right, someone might still be watching. As if on cue, a shadow flickered across the garage window. Beverly's breath hitched. Mason saw it too. His body went rigid, his eyes darting toward the entrance. The old garage had only one door, and the window had been too dirty for anyone to see in, or so they had thought. The siblings remained frozen, listening. Then a slow, deliberate knock sounded against the wooden garage door. Beverly grabbed Mason's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. Mason's voice was low and urgent. "We are not alone." The stranger at the door. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, and heavy. Beverly's pulse pounded in her ears. Her grip on Mason's arm tightened as she stared at the garage door, her mind racing. Who was outside? Had someone followed them? Mason swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the old rusted toolbox sitting near the workbench. He took a cautious step forward, grabbed the heavy wrench, and held it tightly in his hand. Beverly shot him a worried look. "Mason, what are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he crept toward the door, his footsteps eerily silent against the wooden floor. Beverly followed close behind, her breath shallow. Another knock. This time, louder. Mason hesitated for only a second before gripping the doorknob. He yanked the door open in one swift motion, raising the wrench, and froze. Standing in the dim evening light was a woman. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s or early 70s, with sharp blue eyes that glimmered beneath a cascade of silver-streaked black hair. She was wrapped in a thick brown coat, her wrinkled hands clasping a leather satchel close to her chest. She wasn't a stranger. Not entirely. Beverly didn't recognize her, but something in the woman's face, in her expression, felt familiar. The woman's gaze flickered between them, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't have opened the box." Beverly's blood ran cold. Mason recovered first, gripping the wrench tighter. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman exhaled, shaking her head. "There isn't time. You need to come with me. Now." Beverly exchanged a quick glance with Mason. This was insane. A mysterious woman showing up, right after they found their grandfather's hidden past. It was too much to be a coincidence. "Excuse me," Beverly said, crossing her arms. "Why would we go anywhere with you?" The woman sighed, as if she had expected their hesitation. She slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to Beverly. Beverly's breath caught in her throat. It was the same man from the other photograph, the one standing next to their grandfather. But this time, the picture was different. He was holding a baby. A baby with the same blue eyes as the woman standing before them. Beverly's mind reeled. She looked up, heart racing. The woman's voice softened. "My name is Eleanor, and your grandfather was the only father I ever knew." Buried truths. Eleanor. The name from their grandfather's journal. The name they had been searching for. Beverly's hands shook as she stared at the woman. You knew our grandfather." Eleanor nodded, her face unreadable. "Yes, and if you found the box, then you're in danger." Mason scoffed. "Right, because of some old letters and a classified government document." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Because you don't know what you're dealing with." Mason still wasn't convinced. "You expect us to just get in a car with a woman we've never met. Why should we trust you?" Eleanor pursed her lips. Then she reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a second document, one even older than the one they had found. She unfolded it and held it out for them to see. Beverly's eyes widened as she read the words at the top of the page. Project ECHO, FILE 042, Sub GGCT, Robert Whitmore. Kilesa FID Operation or EPORT. But that wasn't what made her gasp. It was the handwritten note scrawled at the bottom, written in the same familiar handwriting from their grandfather's journal. "If you are reading this, find Eleanor. She is the key. Beverly's stomach twisted. He wanted us to find you. Eleanor nodded gravely. Yes, and now that you have, I can finally tell you the truth. Mason hesitated, still gripping the wrench. The truth about what? Eleanor took a deep breath. About why your grandfather had to disappear. The escape. The weight of Eleanor's words pressed against the silence. The dim garage light flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the cluttered workbench. Beverly exhaled sharply. All right, let's say we believe you. Let's say Grandpa was part of something dangerous. Why are we in danger now? He's been gone for years. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Because you weren't supposed to find that box. And if you did, it means someone else is already watching. A sudden noise outside made them all stiffen. A car engine. Then, the unmistakable sound of gravel crunching under boots. Eleanor's face went pale. We need to leave. Now. Mason moved first. Where's your car? Down the street, Eleanor whispered. We have to go out the back. If they see us. The garage door rattled. Beverly sucked in a sharp breath. Someone was outside. Mason grabbed her hand. Bev, move. Eleanor led them toward the back exit, her steps quick but silent. Another knock. This time, it wasn't slow. It was forceful. Urgent. Beverly's mind was spinning. Who was out there? Who was after them? They reached the back door. Eleanor pressed her finger to her lips, signaling for silence. Then she slowly pushed it open, leading them into the dark alleyway behind the garage. The cold night air hit Beverly's skin, but she barely noticed. Every nerve in her body was screaming. Eleanor motioned to a dark-colored car parked a few houses down. There. Move fast. Beverly and Mason followed, their hearts pounding. Then, crack. A gunshot rang through the night. Beverly screamed as the sound echoed through the alleyway. Mason shoved her forward, urgency in his voice. Run. Eleanor pulled open the car door, shoving them inside before jumping into the driver's seat. More footsteps. More shouts. Then the car roared to life, tires screeching as Eleanor slammed her foot on the gas. Through the rear window, Beverly caught a glimpse of two figures standing near the garage, dressed in dark suits, their faces obscured by the shadows. Her stomach dropped. Whoever they were, they had guns. Mason turned to Eleanor, breathless. What the hell is going on? Eleanor's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. They found us. Beverly's throat was dry. Who? Eleanor's eyes met hers in the mirror. The same people who made your grandfather disappear. Silence filled the car as they sped down the dark, empty road. Beverly's hands trembled in her lap. Mason looked just as shaken. Their quiet, predictable life had just exploded into a nightmare. And somehow, they knew this was only the beginning. The chase into the unknown. The car's tires screeched against the pavement as Eleanor gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. The cold wind howled through the half-open windows, whipping against Beverly's face as she tried to steady her racing heart. Mason sat stiffly in the back seat, his eyes locked onto the side mirror. They're following us. Beverly turned, glancing back. Two dark SUVs were weaving through the streets behind them, their headlights off, a silent but menacing pursuit. Eleanor's jaw tightened. They'd always find a way. Beverly swallowed hard. Who are they? The government? The FBI? Eleanor's hands flexed on the wheel as she took a sharp turn. No. Worse. Mason leaned forward. How much worse? Eleanor's gaze flicked to the mirror. They're part of something bigger, something that doesn't officially exist. Beverly's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She pressed harder on the gas pedal, sending them flying down an empty road outside of town. The city lights disappeared, replaced by the vast darkness of the open countryside. The SUVs stayed close, their engines roaring in the silence. Beverly's fingers clenched against the leather seat. Eleanor, we're running out of road. Where are we going? Eleanor exhaled sharply. Somewhere they won't follow. She suddenly yanked the steering wheel, sending the car veering off the paved road. Gravel exploded beneath the tires as they plowed into a narrow dirt path, flanked by dense, towering trees. Beverly yelped, gripping the door handle as the car lurched and bounced violently over the rough terrain. Mason's voice was sharp. Are you crazy? They'll catch up in no time. Eleanor smirked. Not if they can't find us. She killed the headlights. The car plunged into complete darkness. Beverly's breath caught in her throat. The world outside became nothing but shadows and the eerie silhouettes of trees racing past. The SUVs weren't far behind, but without lights, the chase became a game of blind faith. Mason swore under his breath. This is insane. Eleanor didn't slow down. Welcome to my life. Then, the road disappeared. Eleanor slammed the brakes, sending the car into a violent skid. The tires screamed against the damp earth as the vehicle spun sideways, kicking up a thick cloud of dirt and leaves. The car came to a shuddering stop just inches from a steep drop. Beverly's chest heaved, her pulse wild in her ears. Eleanor turned in her seat. Get out. Mason gaped at her. What? Eleanor didn't wait. She threw open her door, grabbing the leather satchel as she stepped into the dark wilderness. Beverly and Mason hesitated only a moment before scrambling after her. Behind them, the SUVs approached fast, their tires crushing the dirt road. Eleanor grabbed Beverly's arm, dragging her toward the tree line. Move. We don't have time. Mason followed close behind, his breathing ragged. Where the hell are we going? Eleanor glanced back, eyes fierce, underground. Then she pulled them into the forest, a hidden world. The cold night swallowed them whole. The trees were thick, their tangled branches creating an almost suffocating canopy. The only sound was the distant hum of engines. And then silence. Eleanor pushed forward, moving through the darkness like she had walked this path 1,000 times. Beverly's breath came in short gasps. Where are we going? Eleanor didn't stop. You'll see. Mason cursed under his breath as he tripped over an exposed tree root. You could at least tell us where the hell we're heading. Eleanor finally slowed. We're going somewhere safe. She stopped in front of a moss-covered boulder, pressing her hands against the surface. Mason frowned. Great. We ran all this way to find a rock. Eleanor shot him a look before pushing against the stone. There was a deep metallic click. And then, the ground shifted. Beverly stumbled back as the rock slid open, revealing a narrow passage leading underground. A rush of stale air seeped up from the darkness below. Mason blinked. What the? Eleanor turned, her expression grim. Inside. Now. Beverly hesitated only a second before stepping forward. The passage was narrow, the walls rough with age. A hidden bunker. Eleanor led them down, pulling a switch on the wall. Dim yellow lights flickered to life, casting a weak glow over the metal walls. Mason let out a low whistle. This is insane. Beverly turned to Eleanor, her voice a whisper. What is this place? Eleanor exhaled. Somewhere your grandfather built a long time ago. She set the satchel down and faced them. Now sit. You need to know the truth. Beverly swallowed. The truth about what? Eleanor's eyes darkened. About what your grandfather did. About Project Echo. The forgotten past. Eleanor took a deep breath before speaking. Your grandfather wasn't just a mechanic. He was a scientist, a researcher. And for years, he worked for an organization that didn't officially exist. Mason leaned forward. An organization. Eleanor nodded. A government division that operated outside the law. They called themselves the Echo Division. Beverly frowned. What did they do? Eleanor's gaze hardened. They erased people. Silence filled the bunker. Beverly's skin crawled. What do you mean? Erased. Eleanor's fingers tightened into fists. People who knew too much. People who became liabilities. Your grandfather was part of a program that made them disappear. Mason's voice was low. You mean, like killing them? Eleanor hesitated. Sometimes. Other times, they did something worse. They made them forget. Beverly shivered. How? Eleanor's eyes flickered to the satchel. She reached inside and pulled out a small black device about the size of a deck of cards. She set it on the table. This, she whispered, was your grandfather's last invention. Beverly's stomach twisted. Mason narrowed his eyes. What is it? Eleanor hesitated. Then, she pressed a button. A soft hum filled the air. The device glowed faintly before shutting off again. Beverly stared. What did it do? Eleanor's voice was almost a whisper. It erased the last 5 seconds from your memory. Mason went rigid. What? Eleanor looked at them both. That's what they were working on. A way to erase people's pasts. To wipe memories. To rewrite lives. Beverly felt sick. And Grandpa. He was part of this. Eleanor nodded, until he tried to stop it. Silence filled the room. Beverly's mind was racing. Their grandfather hadn't just been hiding. He had been running. Mason's voice was tight. And now they want us because we found out. Eleanor's expression darkened. They don't want you to know the truth. She looked them both in the eye. They want to erase you. A cold dread settled in Beverly's stomach. Mason clenched his fists. Then we fight back. Eleanor exhaled. That's exactly what your grandfather would have wanted. Beverly looked at the device, the weapon that could rewrite minds. Her grandfather had died to keep it hidden. Now, it was up to them to finish what he started. The final revelation. The dim light of the underground bunker flickered, casting shifting shadows across the metal walls. Beverly's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the device sitting on the table, the last invention of their grandfather. Mason clenched his fists. So, you're saying this thing can erase memories? Eleanor nodded grimly. Not just erase, rewrite. Your grandfather created a way to manipulate memory at will. The people after us. They don't just want to destroy this technology. They want to use it. Beverly swallowed the lump forming in her throat. Why did Grandpa keep it hidden? If he invented it, why didn't he destroy it? Eleanor hesitated. Because he believed it could also be used for good. Mason let out a dry laugh. How? How do you use something like this for good? Eleanor's gaze softened. He thought it could help people. Soldiers with PTSD, victims of trauma. He wanted to give them a second chance, to free them from pain. But the Echo Division saw it as something else, a weapon. Beverly shivered at the thought. Mason exhaled sharply, shaking his head. So what now? We're sitting in a hole in the ground while those people are out there, hunting us. Eleanor turned away, gripping the table. We have 2 choices. She looked at them both, her eyes serious. 1. We run. We take the device, disappear, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Beverly didn't like the sound of that. And 2. Eleanor's voice was firm. We finish what your grandfather started. The plan. Beverly and Mason sat in stunned silence as Eleanor outlined the plan. The Echo Division's main facility is hidden outside the city. That's where they develop their most classified tech. If we destroy their database, we erase every record of the project. They'll lose years of research. Without it, the device is useless to them. Mason raised an eyebrow. You want us to break into a secret government facility? Eleanor's lips twitched. More or less. Beverly groaned, rubbing her temples. That's insane. We don't even know where this place is. Eleanor reached into the satchel and pulled out a worn notebook. Your grandfather did. She flipped through the pages, stopping at a rough sketch of a building floor plan. There were markings, security routes, and a note scribbled at the bottom. The only way to end this is from within. Beverly's breath hitched. Their grandfather had planned for this. He knew they might have to finish what he started. Mason sighed. All right, let's do it. Eleanor's eyes gleamed. Good, because once we go in, there's no turning back. The infiltration. The facility loomed ahead, a cold gray structure hidden deep within a dense forest. Fences lined the perimeter, topped with razor wire. Guard towers stood like silent sentinels, their searchlights sweeping the ground below. Beverly's heartbeat thundered. This was real. Eleanor checked her watch. Security rotation in 60 seconds. That's our window. Mason adjusted the straps of his backpack, glancing at Beverly. You ready? She exhaled. Not even a little. Eleanor smirked. That's the spirit. Let's move. They stuck to the shadows, slipping through the forest until they reached the fence. Eleanor produced a small device from her pocket, attaching it to the metal. A faint click. Then, the electricity cut off. Mason whistled. Nice. Eleanor grinned. Grandpa left me some toys. They climbed over the fence, landing in the damp grass. The facility's entrance was ahead, a massive steel door guarded by two men. Beverly's stomach tightened. How do we get past them? Eleanor pulled a small vial from her pocket. With this, she pressed a button on the memory device and whispered, Watch closely. She approached the guards casually. Hey. They tensed, raising their weapons. Who the hell are you? Eleanor tossed the vial at their feet. A thin mist erupted. The guards blinked. Then suddenly, their eyes went blank. Beverly gasped. The guards turned to each other, confused. What were we? Eleanor smirked, waving them off. Break's over, guys. The men nodded vaguely and wandered away. Mason gaped. You just made them forget we were even here. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. Beverly felt a mix of awe and terror. This device was powerful, too powerful. They slipped inside. The final battle. The facility's interior was a labyrinth of sterile white corridors. Alarms hadn't been triggered, yet. Eleanor led them through the hallways, using her grandfather's notes as a guide. The server room is 3 levels down. We plant the virus, and it's game over. They turned a corner and froze. A team of guards stood at the far end of the hall. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, locked eyes with them. His expression darkened. They're here. Alarms blared. Eleanor swore. Run. They bolted down the hallway as bullets ripped through the air. Beverly's lungs burned as she sprinted. Mason shoved over a cart of supplies, slowing their pursuers. Eleanor grabbed Beverly's hand and pulled her through a door. The server room. Mason slammed the door shut behind them. Now what? Eleanor yanked a laptop from her bag, plugging it into the mainframe. I need 2 minutes. Beverly held her breath as Eleanor's fingers flew over the keyboard. The door rattled. Mason grabbed a metal pipe. They're coming. Beverly looked at the memory device in her hand. She had an idea. She turned the dial on the device, adjusting the settings. When the door burst open, she pressed the button. A pulse of invisible energy surged through the air. The guards froze. Their eyes glazed over. Then, they dropped their weapons and turned to each other in confusion. One guard muttered, "What are we doing here?" Another frowned. "Weren't we on break?" Beverly gasped. It had worked. Eleanor grinned. "Nice move." Mason whistled. "That's freaky." Eleanor pressed one last button. And, done. The facility's data was wiped. A voice crackled over the speakers. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Eleanor's eyes widened. Time to go. The escape. They sprinted through the facility as alarms screamed around them. A deep rumble shook the walls. The entire structure was collapsing. They reached the exit just as the ground erupted behind them. Flames and debris shot into the sky. Beverly hit the ground, gasping for air. Mason lay beside her, panting. Eleanor stood, brushing off dust. Well, that was fun. Beverly groaned. I'm never doing that again. Mason smirked. Speak for yourself. Eleanor grinned. You two did good. They watched as the last remnants of the Echo Division burned. The device, their grandfather's creation, was gone. But so was the threat. Beverly exhaled, staring at the stars above. For the first time, in a long time, they were free.